The dawn had not yet touched the horizon when the rumble began to roll across the sky, a deep, heavy sound, impossible to ignore. For many Americans, that sound meant power, security, and technological dominance. It was the echo of a nation that had emerged victorious from World War II and now stood as the greatest military power on Earth. And at that moment in history, no symbol represented that national pride better than the colossal Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, a machine so massive, so resilient, and so lethal that it would outlive generations of pilots, survive wars, presidents, and even the very strategic system that created it. For the United States, it was more than a bomber. It was a flying declaration of power. By the late 1940s, the world was changing rapidly. The war had ended, but peace felt fragile. Rising tensions between Washington and Moscow were turning former allies into ideological rivals. As the Soviet Union expanded its influence across Eastern Europe, American military strategists began to imagine a scenario that seemed increasingly inevitable: another global war. This time, however, it would be a nuclear one. In this climate of uncertainty, military planners realized they needed something entirely new. The bombers that had won the war, like the legendary Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, were no longer enough. They needed an aircraft capable of crossing continents, carrying devastating weapons, and above all, ensuring that any enemy would think twice before launching an attack. That is how the project that would eventually become the B-52 began. In 1946, the U.S. Air Force issued a challenge to the aviation industry. The new bomber would need to fly thousands of kilometers without refueling, carry enormous bomb loads, and operate at altitudes high enough to evade enemy defenses. Several companies responded, including Convair and Glenn L. Martin Company, but it was Boeing that presented the proposal that captured the most attention. Even so, the path to the final aircraft would be anything but simple. The project would change countless times. Engines would be replaced, wings redesigned, entire concepts abandoned. At one point, the whole program seemed to be on the verge of cancellation. The decisive turning point came when engineers abandoned the older turboprop engines and embraced the technology that was beginning to revolutionize aviation: jet engines. Inspired in part by the sleek Boeing B-47 Stratojet, the new concept featured a swept wing of more than 35 degrees and 8 engines mounted beneath the wings. This transformed the aircraft completely. It was no longer just a heavy bomber. It had become something far more ambitious, a giant capable of flying faster, higher, and farther than any other strategic strike aircraft of its era. When the first prototype finally took off in 1952, it became clear that something extraordinary had been created. The B-52 was not merely large, it was colossal. With a wingspan of more than 50 meters and an immense payload capacity, it could carry dozens of tons of weaponry. Yet what truly made it unique was its mission. During the height of the Cold War, these aircraft constantly patrolled the skies armed with nuclear weapons. At certain points in history, bombers were airborne 24 hours a day, ready to respond to any attack within minutes. This constant state of readiness turned the B-52 into one of the pillars of American nuclear deterrence. While politicians debated and diplomats negotiated, these metallic giants remained silently prepared for the worst scenario imaginable. Generals such as Curtis LeMay, commander of Strategic Air Command, believed that the mere existence of these aircraft was enough to prevent nuclear war. If an enemy knew the United States could retaliate instantly, they might never dare to press the button. But the B-52 would not remain confined to the role of a nuclear threat. In the 1960s, a new war began to consume American attention and resources. On the other side of the planet, deep within the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, U.S. forces were heavily involved in the Vietnam War. It was there that the Stratofortress revealed another face of its power, Instead of nuclear weapons, it began carrying massive loads of conventional bombs. Entire formations of bombers crossed the sky together, releasing tons of explosives over enemy positions. For the soldiers on the ground, the experience was terrifying. Even before the bombs fell, the sound of the 8 engines announced what was coming, a constant heavy thunder that seemed to grow louder every second. Many Vietnamese veterans would later recall that the terror began long before the explosions. It began with that sound in the sky, a sound that felt endless, as if the air itself were being torn apart. And then, within minutes, the ground would shake as hundreds of bombs struck the earth. Even after Vietnam, the B-52 continued to prove its relevance. Decades after its first flight, it would still take part in modern conflicts such as the Gulf War, launching cruise missiles and precision-guided bombs with deadly accuracy. Over the years, new radars, sensors, electronic systems, and advanced weapons were installed, constantly transforming the aircraft. The plane flying today may have been built in the 1960s, but the technology inside it is the result of decades of continuous modernization. Perhaps that is what makes the B-52 so extraordinary. It is not simply an old machine that continues to fly. It is a living testament to the evolution of modern warfare, an aircraft designed in a world dominated by nuclear fear that managed to adapt to completely different conflicts, revolutionary technologies, and entire generations of pilots. Today, many of the aviators flying these aircraft were born decades after the first B-52 rolled off the production line, yet they still take control of the same metal giant their grandfathers might have seen take off. And if U.S. Air Force plans continue as expected, the bomber could remain active well into the middle of the 21st century. That would mean a single aircraft serving for nearly a century. And perhaps that is why, inside American air bases, there is a phrase often repeated with a quiet smile among the crews. A phrase that mixes humor with admiration for a machine that has become almost legendary. The last pilot who will fly the B-52 has not even been born yet.